The journey has not been easy for the Callisto Protocol. It was one of the first in a long string of bad PC ports at launch, something that has continued even now with ports like The Last of Us and Star Wars Jedi Survivor. It did something different with its combat than what is traditionally expected in its genre, with more focus on melee and dodging, being up close and personal, instead of retreating and just firing off shots while walking backwards. And that's a double-edged sword. It was also victim to some of the most baffling double standards from people who can't process basic information, from the light beams hitting their retinas, and don't know how to look at a gameplay preview but will lie to their audience's faces and tell them that they've been keeping up with and looking forward to a game. But I made a whole video stomping in ahead already, and I'm not going to dwell on it too much right now. Needless to say, it did its own thing, and didn't follow both what the most narrow-minded surface-level horror game channel still stuck in 1996 expected it to do, nor did it follow the tired, played-out-ass trend of making every game an open-world immersive sandbox game with a million different things to craft to extend the runtime to 40 hours. Or ability points everywhere so you can do basic shit like aim your gun properly. It was unapologetically a traditional, linear, chapter-based, story-driven game, like we used to get. From the PS1 to mid-PS4 era, when whether a game was worth the price was determined by whether or not you enjoyed the experience, and not whether or not the game dragged it out so it could say that it made you play as long as Assassin's Creed Valhalla. The game, of course, had its issues. It's the first IP from a new studio. It was bound to need room for improvement, but I went over its strengths and its weaknesses in my original video on. I'm assuming you watched that. If not, you should. Now, since launch, a lot of the game's issues have improved, tweaked, and been fixed. You can now listen to audio logs while moving, New Game Plus, DLC skins, tweaks and improvements to the combat have been added. Now, I'm going to be honest here. I think the post-launch support for the game, as far as updates and tweaks, has been phenomenal. The game is in a state now they should absolutely be proud of. A lot of games become the internet's punching bag for a little while because man-children need shit to hate on, so they can get that feel-good chemical from acting like a bitch online, while people feed them likes for being negative. And once a new game comes out for them to attack and beat up on, the last trendy hate wagon target just gets left out to die. But these guys at Striking Distance have really been on the grind regardless of how divisive the game is. They've been taking feedback that matters, but haven't done anything crazy to just piss away their original vision and their original fanbase. And I believe that 100% deserves respect, because too often studios that aren't owned by anyone major like Ubisoft or something, to where they don't have to give a fuck about any negativity, just have to bend the knee and throw out their ideas. That said, while the updates for the game have been great, I have to keep it 100 with you and say the way the DLC for this game was handled was pretty fucking horrendous. Some of the shit that was in this season pass is just ridiculous. Now, skins is one thing. That's all fine and cool. There are actually a lot of really nice skins now. But really, the pack of skins should have been purchasable by themselves and in a bundle. As it stands, the only skin that is by itself is the Outer Way skin, and I think that's just silly. The Riot Mode DLC is extremely fun. It's a horde mode similar to the Mercenaries from Resident Evil, a Gears of War's horde mode. It's got some issues still linked to the combat that's just baked in that you simply cannot ignore. Like not being able to disengage or run from enemies without taking a hit. So it can feel pretty shitty when you're trying to do bonus objectives for extra money to buy upgrades and you're just constantly getting bonked over the head while you run around. But outside of that, it's really just you and the horde. I could play this shit alone for hours, well worth the money. There's something to be said about the fact that in something like Resident Evil, these kinds of modes used to be included entirely in the base game for free, but considering the gaming landscape has changed and even Resident Evil charges for these kinds of things now, to the point where they're likely going to charge for the Separate Ways expansion that used to come with the original for free, that's not really a this game problem. What is a this game problem is the contagion mode. There is not a single reason you can convince me that someone should be charging $10 for a fucking difficulty mode. A permadeath difficulty mode at that. That is fucking dumb. There is no defending that. I would say the only DLC that is really worth it if you just want the good shit is the Riot mode and the new story DLC, Final Transmission, which I really want to talk about in this video. So here's your warning that, as always, this is a spoiler-filled discussion like I always do from beginning to end, where I talk about it freely. Just as a disclaimer, I played this on PS5 instead of PC this time around because of the 2 days early PlayStation exclusivity. I played the PC version later on in a second playthrough once that released. So the DLC starts with a recap of everything that happened in the base game for returning players. Jacob wakes up standing around in a random part of Black Iron with no idea how he got there, and Mauler tells him to make for her lab. Something I should mention is that this game has a bug sometimes where you load it up and it won't load your saves unless you quit and reload. You can start with a completed main game save, but since mine didn't load, I thought you had to make a fresh save with none of your progress. And I thought it had committed the grave sin of a DLC taking all your fucking weapons away, but that's not the case. Considering that even if you start from a fresh save, the game starts you with a reasonable arsenal and upgrades, I don't think it's that big of a deal. Everything starts off mostly normal enough as we explore and make our way back to Mauler's lab. She says she's found a ship that they can use to escape in with her research. Jacob only gave Danny part of what she needs to prove that Cole and the organization he works for are responsible for what happened. She'll meet him in person in the loading bay. So we're off and things seem fine at first, but pretty early on it becomes clear something isn't right. Jacob is having even more bizarre hallucinations than the one he was having when his core was linking the Dannys. And these are the highlight of this DLC. They do some really cool things to fuck with you, like the vents now transform right before your eyes into death traps, opening chests only for there to have never been one to open, with Jacob even hallucinating himself opening the chest in third person, getting stuck in looping hallways, writing all over the walls. Things aren't making sense. The layout of Black Iron has changed. Things just aren't right. I'm only going to sparingly mention this until the end, and I wasn't even going to bring her into this because I really don't give a shit, and I've had her muted forever now. But people hit me in the DMs telling me I should take a look at Sphere Hunter's tweets, and of course, whenever I need to make an example out of someone with the brain power of a fucking squirrel, there Susie is to be the prime candidate. But the twist ending is not supposed to be that this isn't real. That's very clear by the first hour or so of the DLC. That's not the mystery here. Something horrible has clearly happened to Jacob. The mystery is how much of what Jacob is seeing is something that has really happened, how much of it is just in his mind, and what terrible fate befell him. You can pick up an audio log that is Jacob breaking down, sounding confused, barely conscious, and clearly freaking out and dying on the main path of this DLC. Eventually we run into this DLC's new enemy type, the Biobot, and we need to sneak past him. The regular robots were already freaky and dangerous, but things have gotten weird. These things have this weird evil stare on their face. They have eyes, they're covered in flesh, they look human. To get to the loading bay, we have to cut through the factory where the security bots are produced. Mauler warns Jacob that it's about to get really fucked up in here, because what she's done here is unforgivable. She, jealous of the idea that Cole would take credit for most of the work at Black Iron, decided to start a secret project, combining her research on the biophage with the security bots. In doing so, she created some sort of weird robo-human biophage monstrosity that we know as the Biobots. This project was a failure, and after one of them killed one of her most important co-workers, she shut it down completely. One of which just broke Jacob's fucking stun baton after screaming at him that he'll never escape. Unbelievable, because as Jacob says, I really like that baton. So now our course of action is to try to find a new weapon. You come upon a part of the game where you need to sneak around some more biobots since you don't have your baton, but thankfully, unlike a lot of DLCs that involve stealth, the game doesn't fucking insta-kill you the moment you're spotted, so it's not an annoying shit show like it usually is in games. Which is definitely a good thing, because I got spotted at one point and these things were beating my fucking ass so bad you would have thought I stole drug money from them or something. It was rough. What is annoying is the new hollow puzzles they've added. The worst offender of which being the one they put directly in the room where you pick up your new weapon. This is the hardest and most irritating to figure out, and you don't have much time to do it before a few biobots break into the room. If they do that, you're fucked and need to restart. The amount of times I had to restart this room, I don't even want to fucking talk about. Once we get this hammer though, it's time to party. I love this thing. It hits like a fucking truck. On top of that, it is exactly what this game needed. An AoE attack that will help get things off of you when you need some breathing room. It shreds through basic grunt biophage like they're made of toilet tissue, which leads to probably my favorite room in the game outside of the shredder room from the shoe chapter. This is where shit gets crazy. Jacob is losing it. Swarms, and I mean swarms of enemies are coming at him. Some of them are real, some of them are hallucinations that just disappear as soon as they touch you or you touch them. It's a clusterfuck, and this hammer is out here doing work. While headed to the ship, in the loading bay, Jacob runs into Mauler face to face, and she gets killed by a biobot. This makes no sense to him. She was supposed to be on the ship waiting for him, not somewhere wandering around random. Descending into where the ship is located, everything breaks down, the walls are covered in messages written in blood. Almost symbolic of him descending into some sort of metaphor for hell. And in the final room, Mauler has revived as a super two-hit. I like this boss fight because it's a major improvement over the other bosses from the main game outside of the first phase Ferris. The formula is shaken up a bit by the ground pound stun that can't be dodged unless it's the full screen running one. The up close one has to be interrupted with your stun attack. After we bring her down and rush to the ship, things get even weirder. Not only because this is Jacob's ship, but Mauler is somehow still talking to him even though he just killed her. And as he flies away, things snap back to the real world, and all is made clear. Jacob, after sacrificing himself to save Danny and Mauler's message to him at the end of the game, was cornered and pulled a Halo reach and just kept fighting and fighting, making his last stand until eventually an explosion either blew him apart or stunned him long enough for the biophage to finally take him down and tear him apart. Mauler found him in the tower, barely clinging to life, and without his help, had to abandon all plans of escape. Jacob's core is still linked to Danny, so she made the decision to strap him up on life support long enough to transmit the data on her research to Danny and take down Cole. The final data log you can pick up in Jacob's nightmare hints at this if you really listen to it, as she talks about how she just needs to keep the connection alive long enough. The connection, of course, being Jacob's core linked to Danny. I assume that Jacob is seeing what he's seeing in the nightmare world because all this is stuff that Mauler really worked on. And Jacob is simply interpreting all of this research data as some sort of nightmare world he's in. And it's all just a jumbled mess in his mind while he's dying. After the upload is finished, Jacob dies from his wounds. And Mauler presumably dies in the destruction of Callisto with no way out. Like I said, the mystery is not that Jacob is dying, it's what has happened to him. If you're paying attention, the game is trying to keep you guessing. At one point, it slips you a robotic sounding Jacob. At other points, there's shit like "don't believe her lies" scribbled on the walls. Meant to make you wonder not if Jacob is screwed, that much is obvious, but if Mauler betrayed him, and if he's been turned into a biobot himself to complete her experiments. It's also mixing that up by jumbling hints of the real world with her saying things like, "Are you with me? You have to keep fighting." She's trying to keep him alive and keep him conscious. Now, of course, this kind of ending is always going to rub some people the wrong way. Endings where the main character doesn't live or meets a brutal end always makes people feel uncomfortable. We're conditioned to always expect the hero to make it out. Some people are always going to stomp their feet and cry about it because it makes it feel things they don't want to feel. Look at how people reacted to The Last of Us. Don't get me started on the way people went full bitch mode over that. But while I like Jacob, and I think he's one of the most capable horror game protagonists we've ever gotten, and it sucks to see him go out like this, it is what he deserves. He had this coming. The man let an entire colony of innocent people get killed for money, and then he lied to Dani's face about it to manipulate her and use her to escape up until the very end of the game when he started to have a change of heart. Everything that happened from Europa to Callisto would have never happened if Jacob had said something, like Max begged him to. He may be less guilty than Cole, because he didn't directly have a hand in things, but he knew something wasn't right. The signs were there, and he ignored them. He's still guilty nonetheless. And again, I think even though it sucks to see him not only die like this, but die brutally because he's such a good character, I like the way his story ended for him a lot better than what the main game was initially setting up. The second he decided to put Dani in that pod instead of him, he had finally done the right thing. He had accepted that he deserved this, he belonged here, and that these things would likely kill him. Dani talks about his sacrifice like he didn't survive, and I wouldn't want to see one of the most important points of his character arc going from selfish to selfless undermined by just letting him escape. That undermines the whole idea of his atonement, regardless of if it's fucking brutal. Yes, I know it fucking feels bad when a character like this that you've invested hours into playing kicks the bucket, believe me. I'll never forget that mission in Call of Duty 4 when one of the main characters gets nuked after all that fighting you did to survive. I'll never forget how Obscure 2 made me feel when my favorite character in the game, and one of the main and most important characters, made it all the way to the end of the game, kicked what was meant to be the final boss's ass, and then it turned out that ending was a fake out, and there was another final chapter, only to have him die in it. It sucks to see it. You hate to see it. It's supposed to be that way. As far as this hollow-headed idea that because Jacob was killed off, this is IP abandonment. Like, I'm getting kind of tired of verbally smacking the shit out of people like Sphere Hunter because it feels like I'm beating up on a child with a mental defect that they can't really control, so it's not their fault they keep saying some of the dumbest shit you've ever heard. But no, this is not a panic IP flush. They were likely bouncing back and forth between killing Jacob anyway or letting him make it out. As you can tell, the idea of a story DLC was planned in advance, but the specific story of the DLC didn't start until after launch, when they likely made the decision to just go ahead and kill him. On top of that, the developers did a Reddit Ask Me Anything just the other day where they make it very clear they're not done with this IP. They're proud of their work and already have ideas in the works for where to go next with it. And secondly, it's not like this is the first fucking time in history where a horror protagonist has died brutally and didn't make it out. It might be less common in games, and I know Silent Hill has motherfuckers conditioned into thinking that there should always be a best ending in the game where the main character survives even though they did something really shitty if you meet a very specific requirement so that you can still feel good. But this happens all the time in film, and when it does its job. Sticks with you and makes you feel some type of way. I remember every single one of these endings for the fates that awaited the characters at the end. Hell, Saw notoriously kills its main characters at the end of almost every movie, some of which I'd argue didn't even deserve to die. It's very rare to see a Saw protagonist make it out alive. It happens, but more often than not, they get smoked at the end, and in some pretty fucked up ways. No Saw fan goes into a new Saw movie, of which there are now 10, expecting the main character to live. Like, why the fuck am I having to remind mainstream horror channels on examples of horror tropes? Do you understand how ridiculous that is? Do you understand why I don't like these people? Not every game needs to be Resident Evil where the characters make mistakes and they just straight up can't die. It's fine in Resident Evil, but every game is not Resident Evil. Homogenized one-way gatekeepish line of thinking that's infected this app like the fucking plague on what horror games are allowed and not allowed to do. Susie and similar channels would have never lasted as a video game analyzer and reviewer in the very era she glorifies, because of how mentally broken she would be and foaming at the mouth somewhere having a fucking seizure over the fact that all these games are not just Resident Evil. All these beloved games like Fear, she would have hated, too much action. The Suffering, she would have hated, too much action. Doom 3, she would have hated, too much action. I don't give a shit about these people not liking things. They want to live in their fucking bubble, that's fine. But I do care about the fact that we don't get these kinds of unique ideas anymore because of these people and them being mentally incapable of reviewing anything that isn't just trying to be a Resident Evil competitor and just do its own thing. Why is it that all these other genres have these interesting and varied IPs to choose from, and horror games used to have these things, but not anymore? It's thanks to these people because these ideas are frowned upon by them. These games could never come out in this day and age. That's why I started to move my channel in this direction. Because I'm just tired of it. And all that leads me back to the Callisto Protocol, because this feels like a game made in that kind of era. When people just had passion and love in what they did, even if it was unconventional. They didn't feel like they had to be Resident Evil or Silent Hill. When games didn't always get everything right, but the passion was still there. You remember how good Manhunt was? Yeah? Okay, now do you remember that train level? Yeah, I know that PTSD just hit you because that shit was fucking awful. Almost uninstall worthy. But that was still a good game. Do you see my point? The Callisto Protocol, like The Evil Within, like Days Gone, like Spec Ops The Line, are the closest things to modern cult classics as we're ever gonna get. I bought the collector's edition for this game after I had already played it, and bought it on PC. I have the statue sitting with my other statues of games like Cyberpunk 2077 and The Last of Us. It comes with a little personal message from Glen Schofield. And I want to read you something word for word in particular. My name is Glen Schofield, and I'm the CEO of Striking Distance Studios, and the game director of the Callisto Protocol. I wanted to take this moment to personally thank you for picking up the collector's edition of the game. I speak for the entire team when I say the Callisto Protocol was a labor of love, and we're incredibly grateful for your support as a new studio. It means the world to us. This isn't some group of hacks that just slack some shit together to get it out the door. This is a group of people that really believe in what they're making here, despite it being divisive, and not for everyone. They didn't play it safe and just make what your cookie-cutter, smooth-brained survival horror channel expected them to make. They made a real old-school, focused-down passion project, and refused to just make what was safe. These kinds of games we used to get, in addition to the ones that just played it safe. There's nothing wrong with just making what's safe. Make no mistake, that formula works if it works. But when you see all these channels bitching and moaning about how they're tired of remakes and want new ideas, remember how they fucking react to said ideas. But I like where this IP is headed, and I know it's not done. You have no idea how many of these old school games sold less than what was originally envisioned and still got sequels. The publisher pulled an EA and expected the game to sell as much as Call of Duty because they pumped some money into it. That's what happened. It didn't bomb, it still sold well for a new IP, it just didn't meet the absolutely fucking unhinged expectations that they expected to make money-wise. 2 million copies for a brand new franchise is nothing to sneeze at. That is absolutely decent numbers in the first few months. 5 million for a new IP? Are you fucking serious? You're on crack. In comparison, Devil May Cry made 6 million. And that is Capcom's second most popular franchise, with a long and established fan base dating back 22 fucking years. Do you see why I don't like people like Young Ye? This is all information that you don't get. Context that is left out when you hear these fucking morons talk about how a game isn't selling well, which breeds a bunch of uninformed little bitches running around talking about how a game flopped, because it's the new cool thing to hate on for a moment, not having a goddamn clue what they're talking about. There's new lore here that's been added in this DLC about the ranks of the organization Cole is a part of. When you pick up the audio logs from Mauler, she talks about her project, but go look in the files and there are all kinds of details about how Cole could never rise above bishop rank even though his family is royalty. Or about how there's new and old traditions and ideologies. And looking for the quote-unquote survivor to speed up human evolution, and Cole follows the old method, which is something the higher-ups don't approve of. Which is why they're reprimanding him when you walk into his office. This is all post-launch lore added in with this DLC. This IP is not abandoned, and if anything, PlayStation has a clear interest in it. I'm excited to see where this goes, and Callisto is finding its audience, even if that means being divisive and not appealing to everyone. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and know that my The Evil Within 1 and 2 review is on the way. It's just hard to balance life, getting enough sleep for work, getting back into shape, still making time to play games and not just review games. But I've already finished the script for it and just haven't begun recording it yet. I do all this by myself. My reviews also tend to deep dive longer than just a 10-minute IGN one, so I can't just crank out videos rapid fire, especially to speak my mind freely and elaborate on my points. So stay tuned, I'll catch you around.